Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, with his return to the White House, President Donald Trump moves full steam ahead on his promised overhaul of U.S. policies.
That includes an immigration crackdown. We delve into the policies that led to this moment and how the Trump administration is setting the groundwork for mass deportations.
The more you push the agency to say, increase the total, that pushes you towards the lowest hanging fruit of the immigration system, which are not the hardened criminals.
And rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th walk free after President Trump issues sweeping pardons.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. In less than 24 hours, President Donald Trump unleashed a wave of executive actions, some that will take effect immediately, some that will be challenged in court, and some whose potential impacts are more vague.
And the president promises more executive actions in the near future. That's as his cabinet takes shape and as he moves to purge the federal government of those he views as disloyal to him. On the second day of President Donald Trump's second term,
take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts.
He and his family attended the National Cathedral prayer service. A bit of tradition for a president who so often defies them.
So this is a big one.
Within hours of taking the oath of office, an historic blitz of executive actions signed on his first day.
We're getting rid of all of the cancer. I call it cancer. The cancer caused by the Biden administration.
Nearly 80 of them, immediate reversals of Biden-era policies, as well as withdrawals from things like the Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization. Many more of them also controversial.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon. Yes. Full pardon.
With the stroke of a pen undoing the largest criminal investigation and prosecution in U.S. history. Blanket pardons or commutations of sentences for those charged with crimes for the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Among them rioters who violently attacked police and more than a dozen members of far-right groups, including Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys and Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers, who are convicted of seditious conspiracy and plotting the Capitol attack. At a rally before signing the order, President Trump repeatedly referred to January 6th rioters as hostages, while standing on stage with families of Israeli hostages.
We're going to release our great hostages that didn't do, for the most part, they didn't do stuff wrong.
In a memo today, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger took objection to that. When people attack law enforcement officers, the criminals should be met with consequences, condemnation, and accountability. On the issue of immigration, President Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border. Cities like Chicago and Washington, D.C. are now bracing for widespread raids to deport unauthorized immigrants.
I wouldn't call them raids or target enforcement operations. They know exactly who they're looking for. They know pretty much where they'll find them. There's going to be more collateral arrests in sanctuary cities because they forced us to go in the community and find the guy we're looking for.
It's an executive order relating to reforms to the federal workforce, including to the senior executive service.
Another sweeping executive order will make it easier to fire federal employees considered disloyal to the administration. Converting career federal workers into essentially political appointees the president could fire at will. Mr. Trump already taking action on that front, posting on his social media platform that he'll be firing more than 1,000 political appointees across the government. As his new administration ousted U.S. Coast Guard Commandant Linda Fagan, the first woman in charge of a U.S. military branch, a top Trump DHS official accusing her of, quote, leadership deficiencies for prioritizing diversity initiatives over border security. And President Trump continues to threaten tariffs against China, Canada, and Mexico, saying he may even go beyond that.
Well, you'd put a universal tariff on anybody doing business in the United States because they're coming in and they're stealing our wealth, they're stealing our jobs, they're stealing our companies.
Today, the president continued his breakneck pace of laying out his priorities and staffing up his new administration, sitting down with Republican House and Senate leadership to discuss the legislative agenda of the new Congress.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
And he already has his first cabinet member, newly sworn-in Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was confirmed by the Senate unanimously last night. 2 more cabinet picks had hearings today, Elise Stefanik for the U.S. ambassador role at the UN, and Doug Collins to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. And others like Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth and Mr. Trump's pick to lead Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, could see their final confirmation votes this week.
Let's delve more now into President Trump's move specifically on immigration, including executive orders to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented parents and declare cartels terrorist organizations. Our White House correspondent Laura Barone-Lopez has been tracking it all and joins us now. So, Laura, less than a day into Mr. Trump's presidency, we've already seen some legal pushback to some of these immigration-related executive actions. What's the latest on that?
That's right, Amna. There are lawsuits filed already by the ACLU as well as 18 attorneys general in Democratic-led states, specifically challenging that executive order you just talked about that is attempting to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented parents who were born here in the United States. Many legal experts say that that executive order directly defies the 14th Amendment. So far, there's no lawsuit yet against Donald Trump's other executive order that declares a national emergency at the border, which would allow him to bypass some legal statutes and use military and send troops to the border. But sending military to the border is likely to also be fought in court, and it could clash with an 1870s law that prohibits active military from being enforcing civilian laws. And many of the immigration advocates that we spoke to today said that these lawsuits are trying to slow down these to get injunctions. And another thing we should point out on that birthright executive order, Amna, is that many immigration lawyers, immigration advocates are concerned that it could not just impact undocumented children of undocumented migrants born in the U.S., but also children who are born to parents who are here legally on work or education visas.
Laura, are the court challenges here part of the White House strategy? I mean, is there a look ahead that potentially if they end up before a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, the issue could go their way?
Yes, the administration and sources close to the administration that I've talked to expected legal challenges. They didn't really think that these would go without legal challenges, and they feel as though they could potentially get in front of friendly judges, including that conservative dominant Supreme Court. Now, one other action that could very well end up being challenged, Amna, is whether or not the president decides to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. He said yesterday in his address that he would. So far, it appears as though he hasn't yet. And with that action, lawyers and constitutional scholars are concerned that he may very well use powers under the Alien Enemies Act to not just target undocumented migrants, but to also target migrants here who are here lawfully, and he could use it to deport and detain them. So there are a lot of unknowns here. We also don't know how many troops could be sent to the border or when they could be sent to the border. The administration has not provided those specifics yet, Amna.
Well, President Trump had mentioned that there could be a wave of immigration raids in his early days. We saw his border czar, Tom Homan, mention the same thing. When are those raids expected?
Tom Homan said today on CNN that there are actions already being taken, that ICE essentially has its handcuffs off. And he said to CNN that it is not just going to be criminals, migrants that are here, or migrants that pose a public safety threat. He did say that if, as ICE is conducting arrests, if there are undocumented migrants who are not criminals, who have no criminal record, if they are around, then ICE will arrest them as well, and they could be deported and detained. He has said in the past that all people are on the table here. Our colleague as well, Amna, Ryan Connolly Holmes, has been talking to people in Chicago where one of the raids could very well take place, specifically Lawrence Benito, who runs the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, who is trying to help prepare immigrants there.
Regardless of immigration status, people are afforded, certain rights to remain silent, not let people into their homes, making sure that they have a right to an attorney to receive counsel. We understand how ICE operates. We have a plan in place. We've been doing this, work for a while.
And just today, Amna, the Homeland Security Department rescinded a Biden-era memo that told ICE not to target migrants near what they designate as safe spaces, such as churches or schools.
Laura, also yesterday we saw the CBP One app, which migrants had been using as a legal means to get asylum appointments at legal points of entry at the U.S. southern border, shut down right away by the Trump administration almost immediately after they took office. What has that meant in terms of the practical impact at the border?
I spoke to a refugee worker, Amna, located in Tijuana today, who said that there were so many migrants order for those appointments through that CBP One app to get legal entry, that they had sold their homes, that they had sold some of their belongings, that they had quit their jobs in order to make it to the southern border for those appointments. And now they're left with no options and they're not sure what to do. In addition to shutting down the CBP One app, Amna, the president also stopped refugee resettlement admissions. And I was talking to an active duty military member of the 82nd Airborne who said that this impacts his family directly. His family is in Afghanistan, and he's been trying to get them out. That we're talking about the Afghans who helped America during the war there, and he's very upset and troubled by the fact that this executive order, which appears to be indefinite, is impacting his family, and they're looking to the president to reverse course.
It's our White House correspondent, Laura Barone-Lopez. Laura, thank you.
Thank you.
More now on President Trump's move to pardon or commute the sentences of the more than 1,500 January 6th defendants. Mass clemency for his supporters, like David Dempsey, who was sentenced to 20 years for 2 counts of assaulting police officers with a dangerous weapon. Seen here outside the U.S. Capitol, threatening to lynch elected officials. Proud Boys member Dominic Pizzola, who was serving a 10-year sentence for being one of the first to break into the Capitol, using a stolen riot shield to break a window. Scott Miller, who can be seen in the brown jacket near the entrance beating police with a pole. He was serving a 5.5-year sentence. And Jacob Chansley, otherwise known as the QAnon shaman, who pleaded guilty to obstruction of an official proceeding after trespassing on Capitol grounds. For more on the implications, we're joined now by former GOP congressman and advisor to the House January 6th Committee, Denver Riggleman. Welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thanks for having me.
These pardons, this is a real body blow for the U.S. justice system in the sense that this was the single largest criminal investigation in U.S. history. Nearly every FBI field office, nearly every U.S. attorney's office were involved in these prosecutions. Now, all but 14 people have been pardoned. The other 14 had their sentences commuted. How does all of this land with you?
It's heinous. We have insurrectionists that were actually pardoned. And I think it's just ludicrous that that's happening in the United States of America. And I don't think it's just a body blow against the Department of Justice. I think it's a body blow against the American people. And the fact is that the Republican Party can't claim to run on law and order ever again. And for me personally, knowing what happened that day, that these coup-like movements and these insurrectionists are being pardoned by the presidents of the United States, I think it rattles our allies also, and it really shakes the foundations of everything we stand for as Americans.
What's the real-world impact of these pardons and the fact that these rioters are being released from prison?
Well, I think the real-world impact are these individuals are back in their communities where they can organize, they can run for office. Sixers that are presented with medals, that they actually get positions within certain government offices, maybe on the staffs of congressional representatives who support this kind of nonsense and this kind of insanity. I think that's the real world implications. And also when you look at U.S. Capitol Police and those that were attacked that day, it's really this baseline disrespect against law enforcement, right? It's not back the blue, it's screw the blue. And I think that's what you're saying from the GOP today. And, you know, for me, how are they going to recruit the type of people that they need when they see that there's nobody backing them up, especially when they were trying to protect the Capitol and our most, I would say, enshrined and valuable institutions that were attacked that day by really ignorant, violent insurrectionists.
You were extended one of the preemptive pardons that former President Biden issued to members and staffers on the House January 6th committee. How did that process play out? Did you have to request it? And once you got it, did you have to accept it?
It's pretty interesting. I had no idea. I didn't even know till the morning of, and I got a text message with an actual picture of the blanket pardon to all January 6th committee members. That really was the extent of it. I guess I'm supposed to get a hard copy. So I was never asked if I wanted a pardon. If they would have asked me, I'd have said no. It just really chafes me that I have to have a preemptive pardon and sort of be in the same boat as a bunch of violent, mouth breathers like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers that broke the law and went to jail. And we have to worry about political retribution for doing our duty. And as somebody who served in the United States military, took the oath there, is enlisted and as a commissioned officer, somebody took the oath as a United States congressman, as a J6 committee member, it really does make you feel like a stranger in your own country when you have to worry about a preemptive pardon on actually trying to protect our institutions. And I would do it all over again. So no, there was no consultation. It just happened, and I got it through a text message.
Does the former president's novel and sweeping use of the pardon pen make it harder to criticize Donald Trump for the pardons that he issued?
No, I think when you have preemptive pardons of people who try to uphold the law, people who were actually doing their work under a United States Congress resolution, and when you have pardons of violent, superstition-driven fantasists who would rather attack the Capitol than have the rational ability to tell fantasy from fiction or fantasy from fact, those who literally believe that The Lord of the Rings is a documentary. I think that's the difference here. It's really hard, right, to even compare the preemptive pardons from Biden for January 6th committee members and congressional members to pardons of violent criminals that have no ability to discern fact from fiction. I think it should absolutely frighten the American people.
The Trump team's view is that people shouldn't be surprised, given that Donald Trump broadly previewed this during the campaign, and they tend to think that the reaction in the rest of the country will be different than it is here in Washington, where January 6th seems to loom larger in people's thinking. And you can take it a step further and ask the question, if Donald Trump didn't pay a price for allegedly inciting the Capitol riot, he's now protected by the presidency, why should the foot soldiers?
That's maybe the one thing that he did was his pardon actually showed that he thought he was responsible for it. And I think that's something we can look at. Obviously he didn't do it for any noble reason, but he was ultimately responsible for what happened on January 6th. And as far as the foot soldiers, are we saying that people that are of sound mind actually think that QAnon is a real thing? If you think about that, what happened that day, that was purely based on conspiracy theories. Every single person that day, whether they attacked the Capitol or not, believed in something that was false. They believed in this sort of cult-like thing right, that the election was stolen, whether it was through German servers or through broken algorithms or space satellites or NSA or CIA or white vans with ballots, all the ludicrous, ridiculous things that was pushed into the ecosystem by Trump and his minions. So yeah, it should scare the hell out of people that you have somebody up there, right, that pardoned a bunch of violent people where he's actually sort of saying, yeah, it was me. You know, I'm the one who told him to do it. And so for me, I don't care how other people react in Washington, D.C., or care how other people react outside of Washington, D.C. What I care about is truth. What I care about is fighting corruption. And what we're seeing in the Republican Party now is such a deep rot that I don't know if you can actually take it out. So for me, I would rather be alone telling the truth than with many following a lie.
Former GOP Congressman and House January 6th Committee Advisor Denver Riggleman. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now let's turn to congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins, who was in the Capitol during that insurrection 4 years ago and joins us now. Lisa, what are you hearing in terms of how lawmakers are reacting to those pardons?
That's right. Democrats on Capitol Hill openly outraged over these pardons. Republicans also privately, most of them that I talked to, are also very unhappy and frustrated, but they're navigating this world where Donald Trump is the president and the leader of their party. They've been navigating the idea of how do they express this in public. Remember, these are people who personally were fearful for their lives by these same attackers. They know police officers, as do I, who were harmed, over 100 of them harmed. These are people who were pardoned, who smashed police officers with bats and the like. So today we did hear some Republicans coming out a little bit more, trying to navigate this world and expressing that they are openly frustrated.
I'm about to file 2 bills that will increase the penalties up to and including the death penalty for the murder of a police officer, and increasing the penalties and creating federal crimes for assaulting a police officer. That should give you everything you need to know about my position. It was surprising to me that it was a blanket pardon. Now I'm going through the details.
Senator Tillis also criticized President Biden for his pardons, but this is a lesson to members of Congress that Donald Trump, his priorities is not them. His priorities is him, his supporters, and that he doesn't compromise and he doesn't care if they tell him he shouldn't do this.
Meanwhile, Republican leaders in Congress had their first strategy session with President Trump at the White House today. What should we know about that?
It was an important meeting. There is strategy talk. They were there for 2 hours. But I want to point out something about this dynamic here. President Trump comes in with 4 years of experience in office. Let's look at those who he met with today. Speaker Mike Johnson, he's been in office just over a year. John Thune, the new majority leader, just for 18 days. And as Amy Walter and I both like to talk about, 68% of the House arrived after 2016. So Donald Trump here, Congress really kind of works with him more than him working with them at this point.
Finally, Anna, you're tracking the confirmation process for his nominees. Where do things stand?
Right. So we expect more confirmations this week, especially Pete Hegseth for the Department of Defense. We could see that confirmation this weekend. That looks like where it is. What we don't know anything about is 2 of the big high-profile nominees, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence and also RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services. No hearings have been scheduled. We have not seen them on Capitol Hill for a few days, so we're not sure where that stands. But so far, everyone in the Trump administration says they're gung-ho for them, but no update on timing for them.
All right. Our congressional correspondent, Lisa Desjardins. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We start the day's other news with a prisoner swap between the United States and the Taliban. As one of his final acts in office, former President Biden secured the release of 42-year-old Ryan Corbett, seen here with 2 of his children, as well as another American, William McKenty. In a statement, Corbett's family thanked Biden and the Trump administration for, quote, bringing him back home after what's been the most challenging and uncertain 894 days of our lives. The men were freed in exchange for Khan Mohammed, a Taliban member who'd been jailed in the U.S. on narcotics charges since 2008. He arrived in Kabul earlier today, a free man. In Israel, 2 top generals resigned today over the military's failure to stop the October 7th Hamas attacks. One was the top commander for southern Israel and Gaza. The other was Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi. Halevi is the senior-most Israeli official to quit over the attack that killed some 1,200 Israelis and triggered the war in Gaza, which is now paused in a ceasefire deal. On the ground in Gaza, meanwhile, nearly 900 humanitarian aid trucks rolled in today as part of that agreement. In the southern city of Khan Yunis, displaced Palestinians lined up for food and essential supplies.
After 7 months, it's the first time I've received a food basket from the UN. But it's not enough, maybe only for a day or two. We need sheets for tents, and most importantly, we want things that will warm us in the winter, like blankets and mattresses.
The ceasefire does not extend to the occupied West Bank, where Israel says it's launched a, quote, significant and broad military operation targeting Palestinian militants. Health officials there say at least 9 people were killed today and dozens more wounded. UN Chief Antonio Guterres called on security forces there to use, quote, maximum restraint. In Turkey, officials are investigating a hotel fire that killed at least 76 people. The Grand Kartal Hotel is located in the country's northwestern Korolo Mountains, roughly 200 miles from Istanbul. It's believed that the blaze started overnight in the restaurant of the popular ski resort. Part of the resort sits on a cliff, which complicated efforts to extinguish the flames. More than 50 people were injured as panicked guests reportedly jumped out of the windows and tried to climb down bed sheets to escape the fire.
It was like the apocalypse. You cannot focus on one place, one person. The flames engulfed the hotel immediately. In half an hour, they engulfed it very quickly.
The fire came at the start of a 2-week school holiday when hotels in the area are full. Authorities have detained 4 people for questioning, including the hotel's owner. A rare winter storm is hammering parts of Texas and the northern Gulf Coast. Authorities have announced the first ever blizzard warnings for several coastal counties near the Texas-Louisiana border. The famous streets of New Orleans are expecting as much as 6 inches of snow, as is Houston. Meteorologists are calling the storm historic. The governors of Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida have all declared states of emergency. Further north, a large part of the country is still facing dangerously cold temperatures. Sub-zero wind chills are expected from the Dakotas and upper Midwest across the Great Lakes and through the Northeast. On Wall Street today, stocks rose as investors adjusted to the new Trump presidency. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added more than 500 points on the day. The Nasdaq tacked on more than 120 points. The S&P 500 also saw solid gains. And Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist and writer Jules Feiffer has died. His weekly strip, Feiffer, which was initially called Sick, 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 ran in the Village Voice for more than 4 decades, starting in 1956. He wrote comics, plays, children's books, and screenplays in a tone often neurotic, sardonic, and spot on. His best-known screenplay was Carnal Knowledge, about the exploits of 2 men as they navigate a changing romantic world. The 1971 film version starred Jack Nicholson and Art Garfunkel. Jules Feiffer died at his home in upstate New York. He was 95 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, why the Trump administration has withdrawn from the World Health Organization, the inspiration behind one visual artist's provocative work, and we remember the victims of the deadly wildfires in Southern California.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
As part of his blitz of executive orders issued yesterday, President Trump also delivered on a campaign promise to withdraw the United States from the World Health Organization. The White House accuses the WHO of mishandling the COVID-19 pandemic, bias towards China, and says the U.S. is forced to pay more than its fair share to support the international organization. For more on the potential implications of this, we're joined now by Lawrence Gostin, law professor and director of the World Health Organization and Collaborating Center at Georgetown University. Lawrence, welcome back. Thanks for being with us. You know, in your Washington Post op-ed today, you said leaving the WHO would be what you called a grave mistake that would hurt Americans. How so? What's the potential harm here?
Well, thank you for having me, Amna. I believe this is a truly historic decision. The United States really formed the World Health Organization in 1948 and has been its most influential and greatest funder for 75 years. This is going to make America decidedly less safe, less secure. And it's hard for me to think of any national advantage that we get. I only see us alone and isolated, not stronger.
You mentioned the U.S. has been its greatest funder for WHO. If you take a look at this graphic, we should just point out, look at the top 10 sources of funding there. The U.S. there at the top, but there's other groups like the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, countries like Germany, UK, and Japan. But the U.S. is responsible for some 1/6 of the organization's budget. So is President Trump's characterization that the U.S. is shouldering an unfair financial burden here wrong?
Yes, actually, I think it is wrong, but it's not totally wrong. Let me explain. The WHO has a budget of roughly 1/4 of the US CDC. So for a global institution, it's chronically underfunded. It doesn't have the resilience and funding that it needs to put out fires all over the world. So the United States shouldn't pay less, but other countries should pay more. China should, India, the Gulf states, many other middle-income countries. So I think that Trump would do a much greater service to the United States and the world if he stayed in and he negotiated a deal. Yes, let's make WHO more resilient. Let's fund it better. Let's make it more powerful. And let's make it more accountable with financial oversight. But leaving it would gravely damage United States national interests and world health writ large. It's not really like the border where you can kind of seal off the Mexican border so that you can stop immigrants. Germs don't know borders. And a United States without WHO is a United States alone and isolated and more fragile and vulnerable.
Pulling out of the organization means that the U.S. would lose access to the World Health Organization's global public health data, too, which you said would leave agencies like the CDC flying blind. Help make that real for us. What is the potential harm that you are worried about?
I see this as the greatest self-inflicted wound that this executive order has put for us. I mean, it is a grave wound to WHO, but I think it's a more grievous wound to the United States. Here's why. The World Health Organization leads a vast network of public health agencies, laboratories, and international scientists that constantly track novel outbreaks and shares data. Without that, CDC doesn't have an early warning. We can't respond. And so we're weaker, we're less prepared. But here's more, and I think it's really important. Our pharmaceutical industry, the NIH, needs these data to develop vaccines, therapies, and other life-saving tools that we rely on. If you remember back to COVID-19 and Operation Warp Speed, and Trump gets a lot of credit for that, we were at front of the line for vaccines. We may be near the back of the line because we're not going to get data about how these viruses are evolving, what we can do to respond to them and create vaccines.
Lawrence Gostin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Professor and Director of the World Health Organization's Collaborating Center at Georgetown University. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we've discussed, President Trump has signed several executive orders making sweeping changes to the immigration system. Immigration was one of voters' top issues in the presidential election, with many supporting President Trump's message that the current system is broken. But how did we get here? Laura Barone-Lopez takes a deep dive into the history of immigration policies and laws that have led to the complex system we have today.
Since its founding days, the United States had mostly open borders, welcoming immigrants from across the world to work and build lives here. In the late 1800s, record numbers of migrants from Italy, Greece, and Central and Eastern Europe made the journey on newly invented steamships to the United States. Many, especially in America's now crowded cities, began to question the open-door policy.
There was a huge backlash. There was substantial anti-Semitism. There was substantial anti-Catholic discrimination, particularly against Irish immigrants. And so over time, this political pressure built up and built up and built up.
In 1924, Congress passed sweeping legislation restricting immigration.
Congress nearly closes the door, and the part of the door that's open is really just open to Western Europe. Except for Western Europe, the quotas that existed for individual countries were almost laughably small. Sometimes it was this country could have 100 people a year move to this country from places like Southern Europe.
The law, which favored mostly white Europeans, would dominate U.S. immigration policy until the 1960s.
I think it is not a burden, but a privilege to make this really, as it was for them, a new world.
Building on a promise by President John F. Kennedy and making it part of the fight for civil rights, President Lyndon B. Johnson pushed to repeal the quota system. He supported a bill that proponents said would not discriminate against people based on their country of origin, and they stressed it would prioritize skilled workers and family members of people in the U.S., but would not increase the overall number of migrants.
Those promises were absolutely central to selling the bill because the advocates of the bill understood Americans didn't want a huge increase in immigration.
Johnson signed it into law at the base of the Statue of Liberty and emphasized that it did not represent radical change.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions.
The law did, in fact, transform our immigration system, and in particular led to vastly more immigration.
Although the legislation contained annual caps on immigration, there was one important exception: family members of naturalized U.S. citizens.
So if I came and then I wanted to bring members of my family over in subsequent years, only I would have counted toward that quota in the first year, not my extended family members.
Immigration soon soared, and over time, family reunification became the largest type of legal migration to the country. And the foreign-born population shot up from less than 5% in 1965 to just over 15% in 2023.
This is the only area in which the American farm labor supply falls short and is supplemented by Mexican citizens.
Johnson's administration also oversaw the end of a key legal pathway for migrants to work in the U.S. The Bracero program, which had been used since World War II to hire millions of temporary agricultural workers from Mexico, expired in 1964. Those workers continued to cross the southern border, starting a decades-long rise in illegal immigration.
Future generations of Americans will be thankful for our efforts to humanely regain control of our borders.
In 1986, President Ronald Reagan helped pass sweeping legislation that granted a pathway to citizenship to nearly 3 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. This first modern attempt to crack down on the border failed to deliver, and illegal immigration continued to rise through the 90s.
We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws.
President Bill Clinton endorsed proposals by an independent commission to comprehensively reform the immigration system. But these went nowhere.
You saw pretty quickly opposition come from at least two sources. So one was what I would describe as the corporate right, who were worried about the idea of a reduction of immigration, reducing the workforce, and potentially meaning that they might have to pay higher wages and then have lower profits. And then the other opposition was from nonprofits and advocacy groups, particularly Latino and Asian groups, that basically said we should have more immigration, not less. And over time, those groups within the Democratic Party would really become the dominant voice on immigration, at least until the last couple of years, of saying more immigration is better.
Those tensions continued to plague efforts led by presidents on both sides of the aisle to pass comprehensive immigration reform.
What comprehensive immigration reform referred to was essentially three major
provisions. One would have addressed the border and enforcement. One would have addressed the status of the undocumented in the United States. And then the third was changes to the legal immigration system. The concept strategically was that by putting everything together, there'd be something for every stakeholder group to like. Unfortunately, it also meant that there were things that every stakeholder group could not like.
Congress failed to pass bipartisan bills proposed under George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Under President Obama, deportation soared to more than 400,000 in 2013. Almost half of those people were deported under a process called expedited removal, which allows immigration officials to deport individuals without a hearing.
Those individuals were actually apprehended at the border trying to enter the United States. ICE can remove those people very quickly without having to go through the immigration courts. It artificially increases the total number of ICE deportations in a way that's a little bit misleading. Unfortunately, gave President Obama this kind of name, the deporter-in-chief.
By 2016, the situation at the border had transformed. Migration from Mexico began to drop, while increasing numbers of Central Americans began to surrender to border control and claim asylum. Under U.S. law, anyone who claims asylum is entitled to a hearing before an immigration judge and cannot be deported.
Many of them really are fleeing dire circumstances, whether that's due to extreme poverty or crime, corruption by their governments. Many of them do have viable asylum claims. And we've seen, estimates of around 40% of the claims that do get through the system are approved.
Because of immigration court backlogs, this process can take years, and asylees are allowed to live and work in the country until their case is heard.
Smugglers seized upon this, opportunity to start coaching people to make asylum claims, and our inability to fund our immigration courts to handle all these claims created a magnet that drew more people here to this country.
In recent years, this backlog has ballooned from just over 500,000 in 2016 to approximately 3.5 million last year.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
An anti-immigrant agenda was central to Donald Trump's first run for president. As president, he made wide-ranging changes to asylum procedures, including Title 42, which denied entry to asylum seekers under the justification of the COVID-19 pandemic.
What we're doing now is attempting to rebuild the system that can accommodate what is happening today.
President Joe Biden reversed many of those Trump-era policies and oversaw the largest immigration surge in recent history. From 2021 to 2023, annual net migration, both legal and illegal, averaged 2.4 million per year.
Our failure to enforce our laws at the border, to timely provide due process to people at the border, and the perception that the border was out of control. I think that, more than anything, influenced the thinking of people where they would accept this insane rhetoric we're seeing today.
On the campaign trail, President Trump stepped up his anti-immigrant rhetoric.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
So the Republican Party became extremely anti-immigration, sometimes giving voice to false and racist conspiracy theories. The way that Donald Trump appeals to nativism, the way he appeals to xenophobia, you absolutely can see echoes from that to the 1924 law. It's absolutely there.
Trump and his advisors have promised radical changes to the immigration system, from gutting legal pathways like refugee admissions to launching the largest mass deportation program in American history. President Trump's advisors claim they will prioritize deporting undocumented migrants deemed national security or public safety threats. But experts say the deportation numbers Trump is talking about would go far beyond that, reaching a scale potentially never seen before in America.
There is no way to do the mass deportations they're talking about and focus them exclusively on public safety threats. The more you push the agency to say, increase the total, that pushes you towards the lowest hanging fruit of the immigration system, which are not the hardened criminals. When you do a workplace raid, you don't get gang members. You get people who show up for work every day because they're trying to support their family.
Laying the foundation for unprecedented action he can now take in office. For PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone-Lopez.
It's a portrait of an artist capturing parts of his own history and ours. He's been doing it since childhood. and is now in the spotlight with his first national touring exhibition. Senior arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown talks with Vincent Valdez for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
The paintings are often large in scale, almost cinematic in effect. The imagery, confrontational, packing a punch. 120 works now at the Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston, by artist Vincent Valdez.
This is art as provocation?
It's art as truth. You know, it's the truth the way that I see it. It's the truth the way that, based off of my recollection and my observations, my hard examinations about life and the world beyond these studio doors.
The exhibition, titled Just a Dream, presents 25 years of work. Series of paintings are what Valdez sees as chapters that look at both personal and collective histories. It's his first major survey, a chance for the 48-year-old artist to take stock.
I was able to get a glimpse of the story that I've been telling, and that story, my subject has been life in contemporary America, in both its tragedy and its triumph.
You can see that in all the works over the decades.
Oh, absolutely. Not only my own personal reflection on contemporary American society, but my own active participation in contemporary America.
These days, Valdez splits his time between Houston and Los Angeles, where we met in December at his studio, filled with large-scale panels of paintings in progress. On this day, he was at work on something smaller, a portrait of one set of grandparents, and on a series of drawings based on Kurt Vonnegut's classic anti-war novel, Slaughterhouse-Five. His own engagement with art goes back to his childhood in San Antonio, Texas, first surrounded by work done by a great-grandfather, Jose Maria Valdez, hanging in his grandparents' house. Then, beginning at age 10, as part of a project working on large-scale murals around the city.
11-year-old Vincent Valdez is painting a scene of nature and animals.
A year later, the young artist was featured in a local news story.
If there's still nuclear being dropped everywhere, will there still be animals?
With murals, you get the enormous scale, you get that kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
Clearly, that impacted you.
Tremendously. It struck me like a thunderbolt. It has to tell a story, and it has to utilize storytelling as a means of communicating to the world around me, with the world, and to go one step further, it has to be an opportunity for other human beings to see themselves reflected in these images.
And so, in this exhibition, a series titled The New Americans, large portraits of community workers and others making a difference. Another called Since 1977, with just the tops of the heads of U.S. presidents since the time of his birth. And a painted 1953 ice cream truck, a project Valdez did with musician Ry Cooder to honor the largely Mexican-American neighborhood torn down to make room for the building of LA's Dodger Stadium. There are darker stories of the so-called Zoot Suit riots of 1943, targeting Mexican-Americans. And a group of paintings titled The Strangest Fruit, portraying young men, including friends of Valdez, dangling in the air. His intent, he says, to restore a history, documented but little known, of the lynchings of Mexicans and Mexican Americans. But these men bear markers, such as clothing, of contemporary life.
The message that a series like this conveys to the viewer, it engages the viewer in becoming more curious about what does the past have to do with the present. Well, it's exactly this. The past is still very present in 21st century America.
Perhaps the most provocative work, at 38 feet long, a gathering of Klansmen. Again, we see signs that the time is now. And again, Valdez has grounded the image in his own experience.
I was confronted by the Ku Klux Klan when I was 16 years old in front of the Alamo in downtown San Antonio, Texas. One of them leaning over to me while carrying an American flag, peering at me through those socket holes of the hood and saying, "You don't belong here." You are forced to walk around front to back in order to see a single image at one moment.
Valdez wants us to feel the painting's size and presence. He took us to see two newer works now on display at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, part of a large exhibition featuring many artists titled Ordinary People, Photorealism and the Work of Art since 1968. His contribution, a kind of diptych, Michael Jordan mid-flight on one side, on the other, former National Security Council official Colonel Oliver North, testifying about his role in the Iran-Contra scandal involving secret weapons transactions. Two strangely parallel images from the same time, 1987-88, that present both larger American history and Valdez's own.
These historic moments unfolding on my mom's television screen as a child. I remember trying to consider what it meant to be not only an American, but as a young Chicano, a Mexican-American in the south side of San Antonio, what my role, where I fit in within this context of American history. How does a scene like this that unfolds here affect me in my daily life, in my community, right? And so it was a very dizzying effect for me.
Which you're recreating for us.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
Also deeply personal, he says, a desire to share with others the act of making art and the commitment it requires.
In some ways I've created this, this life force inside the studio that really entirely commands and dictates my life. But in this way, I try to share this kind of absolute love and devotion that I have for painting and drawing. In an age where there are short attention spans, or maybe there is, where it becomes a rare occurrence to understand what patience and discipline really is.
The exhibition Just a Dream by Vincent Valdez is at the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston through March 23rd, when it travels to Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.
Well, it's now been 2 weeks since the wildfires began ravaging parts of Southern California, and at least 27 people have lost their lives. As we learn more about the victims, we remember some of those who were lost and the legacies they leave behind. We begin tonight with these 9 stories. 55-year-old Randall Mayad was an avid surfer and life of the party, according to his mother, Carol, who begged him to evacuate. The last thing he told her was, "Pray for the Palisades and pray for Malibu. I love you." Anthony Mitchell, 67, was a retired amputee. His son Justin was in his early 20s and had cerebral palsy. Mitchell was waiting for an ambulance to evacuate them. Mitchell's daughter, Hiji, told reporters, quote, he was not going to leave his son behind, no matter what. Victor Shaw, 66, lived in Altadena and died with a garden hose in his hand. He was shy in nature, but had a deep affection for his sister Sherry, who attempted to get her brother to safety before barely escaping herself.
I went down the street and there was a police car and I flagged him and I said, "My brother's in the house, I need help." And he told me to get out. And he said, "Go."
Erlene Kelly, a retired pharmacist, lived in the family's Altadena home for decades and insisted on staying. Her granddaughter, Brianna, told reporters, quote, "My grandmother was really active. I thought she would be 99 just walking around." Kelly was 83 years old. Arthur Simoneau, 69, died trying to save his home. He was a hang gliding enthusiast and known as a free spirit. His friend Steve said, quote, "Arthur was a good friend to me and a great pilot. It's because of Arthur that I visited many places I may not have gone otherwise." 95-year-old Delise Curry was born in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1920s, but was always destined for Hollywood. Her granddaughter, also named Delise, attempted to get to her grandmother's home as the fires burned, but was unable to.
So I will live with that regret for the rest of my life. I should have did something else.
Rodney Nickerson was a grandfather of 4 and known as a leader at his Baptist church. His daughter, Kimiko, told reporters, quote, "The last thing he said to me as we encouraged him to leave was, 'Don't worry, I'll be here tomorrow.'" Nickerson was 82. 32-year-old Rory Sykes overcame so much in life. He was born blind and with cerebral palsy, but after numerous surgeries, he regained partial eyesight and learned to walk with help. His mother, Shelley, wrote on X, quote, "Despite the pain, he's still enthused about traveling the world with me."
Our thoughts are with those families and all those who suffered losses in the fires. That's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.